Now that we know how to control motors and colour-changing sparkle LEDs, we can combine our skills to create a robot car. If you don't have the Crumble Car kit, you can use any suitable container to act as the chassis, such as an egg box or a Lego frame. So long as the motors are secure, the car will drive. In this lesson, we're going to go through the stages required to put together the Crumble Car kit. If you have this kit, follow along, pausing the video at each stage. Right, let's get started. Here we've got all the parts needed to build our buggy. We're going to add one extra part, which is a sparkle batten. If you haven't got one of these, you could add a single sparkle, or just leave it out. We'll start by attaching our sparkle batten to this part here, which is the top chassis for our car. We'll make sure that we have the terminals we'll need to access at the top, so they're easier to wire in. We should be able to tighten this up by hand, but if not, use a screwdriver and a pair of pliers to make sure it's tight. Once this is in place, we'll add our crumble. Start by positioning the USB socket in this gap and then pushing the bottom of the crumble down so it locks in place, under this lip here. Once this is in place, we'll add our two motors, with the wires coming out at the top and the rotating spindles at the bottom. We'll use the two longer bolts, pushing them through the first motor, through the chassis, and then through the second motor. Before bolting these together, double check that the rotating spindles are facing outwards, as this is where the wheels will attach. Once you're happy, we'll bolt these in place using the spanner and Allen keys together. Let's set this aside so we can work on the lower part of the car chassis. We're going to attach the rotating rear wheel to this piece here. Start by making sure this hole is on the right hand side and the longer wedge of plastic is at the bottom. Right, we'll start by pushing our shorter bolt through this hole, which will then hold in place with our standard nut. This needs to be quite tight as it will stop our rear wheel from wobbling around. Once it's tight, we'll add the rear wheel mount, which will hold in place with this self-locking nut. You'll notice if you look closely that this nut has a special coating inside. This allows the nut to stay in place, even if it's not tightened up fully. Let's add this to the bolt and tighten it up enough to stop the wheel mount from wobbling, but not so much that it stops the wheel mount from rotating. This looks perfect. The wheel mount rotates freely, but it's not wobbly. Finally, we can push the rubber tyre onto the wheel, making sure it's lined up. We're now ready to attach the upper part of the car chassis to the lower part. The space in the middle will house the battery pack. Let's start by pushing the plastic wedge into the space between the two motors, and then sliding the battery pack into position. You'll notice how the nut on the base of the battery pack locates into this space here on the lower chassis. We're now ready to bolt this in place, using a bolt, a spacer, and a wing nut on each side. It makes sense to use wing nuts here, as it makes it quick and easy to undo when the batteries need replacing. Once these are tightened, we're ready to add our wheels, which simply push onto the two motor spindles. Fantastic! We've now built our car, so we're ready to wire it in. We'll wire this motor in as motor 1. But instead of attaching the red wire to the positive terminal, which might be what we'd normally do, we're going to attach it to the negative terminal, and the black wire to the positive terminal. We'll wire the other motor in as motor 2, but here we will connect the red wire to the positive terminal, and the black wire to the negative terminal. So why are these different? Well, you'll notice the motors are facing in opposite directions. One is pointing left, and one is pointing right. To make sure our car moves in the correct direction, we need the wheels to turn in the same direction. That requires us to wire one motor up in reverse to make up for the fact that it's pointing in the opposite direction. Right, let's connect the battery and then we can test our wheels by seeing if we can drive the car forwards. We'll start as always with our program start block, followed by two motor blocks, one to control motor 1 and one to control motor 2. Let's set them both to drive forwards at 40% speed. To test this, we'll press play, but we need to be ready to press the stop button, otherwise our car might crash. Fantastic, that's working really well. We can now wire up our sparkle batten, connecting the positive, negative and digital wires to the appropriate terminals on the crumble. When testing our Crumble Car, here are a couple of hints. Why not build a small mechanics workstand to hold your car up off the ground so you can test different motor settings without it driving off the table? Alternatively, to test your car in a larger area, don't forget you can disconnect it from the computer, and when the batteries are connected, it will run the last program that was sent to the crumble. Why not add a wait 2 seconds block at the start though? This will give you time to attach the battery wires before the car starts moving. And of course, once your car's fully tested, why not make your own body kit? You could disguise it as a police car, a race car, or even some sort of futuristic moon buggy.